Well, hello, it's your internet best friend, Danny. I'm going to start talking about cars on this podcast. Let's just jump right into it. In Toyota/Lexus news and North American exclusive, the IS500 F Sport Performance. That's too many words, Toyota. Don't help me out here. IS500. Now, here's why Toyota has to tack on. Here's what Lexus has to tack on the performance on the IS500 F Sport Performance. Because if you go buy an LS500, it has a 3.5-liter V6 in it with a hybrid booster or whatever the heck it's called, right? It's a hybrid. So the back in the day, I'm so old. I remember when an IS500 or an LS500 meant that it had a 5-liter, obviously a V8 in it. So now that they've played the game, that Mercedes and BMW and every other alphanumeric nomenclature brand has ended up doing, where the numbers used to correlate to the displacement of the engine. Okay, and luckily for Infiniti, nobody cares about buying an Infiniti, but they kind of got away from that, and so. That it makes a lot more sense to me to just get away from the displacement numbers, because it doesn't make any sense to have a number there that doesn't correlate to anything. It's just a glorified trim level now, right? It's like how good of a 5 Series does she drive? It's a 528. Obviously, it's a lease. She's a hairdresser. How can she afford anything more than that? But who knows how big the engine is, right? Nonetheless, I want to drive at this point, which is I don't know why it took Toyota this long to actually build an enthusiast vehicle that people are going to care about. I think it's the last of a dying breed. The concept of shoehorning a V8 into a mid-sized, it's not a compact sedan, I guess, but it's the smallest offering that Lexus really has, other than that weird Prius hatchback that they had a while ago that they don't even make anymore, the CT, I think it was. And it's not an SUV, and it's for the enthusiasts. They did it for the race boys, and I love that. But it makes good business sense, I think, too, because I think it's going to be an attractive thing to a lot of buyers, not a lot, but enough buyers. But the part that's bothering me, right? The part that's in my reptile brain bothering me is, why are there so many words? Lexus, help me out here. IS500 F Sport Performance. Too many words. Don't have so many words in your deal. That's all I'm saying. But I understand, because the LS is a V6, but it's still a 500, so they want to help denote to the customer that this thing is a performance model. 472 horse, and they're saying there's going to be, and that what they're alluding to by calling an F Sport Performance and not just an ISF is that there is a bigger boy coming. And on the, hot on the tails of talking about the F Sport Performance by Lexus, let me just make a couple of comments about, hey, I know that the whole super thing is over and nobody cares anymore, but this is the first time I'm doing a car podcast since 2019, and that is already deleted off the internet. I understand why enthusiasts were pissed with that, and I'm somebody who was pissed with that, but I'm not going to lie, it kind of grew on me over time. I sat in one, haven't got the opportunity to drive one. But what I think is interesting is, and here's the argument that Toyota ended up making, that is why they had to partner with BMW on the Supra, which was, we wanted a straight 6, and the cost of manufacturing one on our own was just simply too high, because we're going to develop one on our own. And they're currently co-developing their own straight 6 with Mazda. Makes a lot of sense, because Mazda says they're going in a more luxurious route. They want a straight 6 to put in their Mazda 6 sedan. And probably their SUVs, and they're going to a rear-wheel drive deal, and it makes a lot of sense what they're doing, so it makes a lot of sense to co-develop it with Toyota. Because I bet you they're going to come out with, a Land Cruiser and stuff like that with a straight 6, and this is a great opportunity to do that. But I get what they're saying, but hey, let me just point something out to you, Toyota. Quick question. Okay, just a quick question, just super fast. Did everyone just piss their pants and crap in Nissan's mouth for not offering the GTR, the non-Skyline R35 GTR was a V. I think the GR is a V6, if I'm correct. I don't believe I'm mistaken in saying that. Or did everyone just buy one, tune it to the high heavens, and give it 1,000 horsepower, and they're doing the Texas standing mile, whooping on freaking Hellcats? Is that what they did instead, Toyota? I think that's what they did instead. So it made perfect sense to me in my mind that Lexus had this thing called the RC Coupe to kind of tune it, decontent it, make it a little less luxurious, and offer that to the public as a Supra. Because to me, the RC 500 and I think it's actually just an RCF, and the RC 350, though that is more of the Supra's legacy than, in my mind, the actual Supra is. That is more the successor to the Supra than the new Supra. And I know I started talking about Lexus and I got off on a tangent, but now I want to jump. This is a juicy story. This is real juicy. This podcast is, and I'm gonna do an episode where I just talk about what this podcast is, but. The basic premise is I'm an automotive enthusiast, but I'm a business guy. I'm a businessman. I'm a businessman conducting business. And a lot of times I understand where automakers and car manufacturers are coming from when they make decisions that piss off me, the automotive enthusiast. When they do that kind of stuff, I get where they're coming from because, at the end of the day, they are business people conducting business. They sell cars to make a profit. They're not selling cars to make the enthusiast happy. I do, however, foresee a future forthcoming where the internal combustion engine is like an automatic Swiss timepiece, and it's strictly for enthusiasts. And the average person who wants to know what time it is just pulls out their phone and they know what time it is. Or they wear a generic Seiko or digital Casio, or they wear a G-Shock, and that's how they know it. And they drive an electric. So that's the version of I drive an electric, blah, 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 or I don't even own a car. I just, lease or whatever. Or, I subscribe to some app, and I get a car when I need it. Otherwise, they deliver whatever. You just get everything delivered to your house. No one's going anywhere anyway. But this thing is happening over at our friends at Jeep. And Jeep is like one of those movies in the 90s where the kid is just this brilliant, super smart kid. They have no opportunity. They have all the smarts in the world, but no opportunity because they don't have the right support system. And that's who Jeep has been historically as a brand, right? First as part of AMC or American Motor or whatever that company was that went out of business, and Chrysler bought their pieces in order to basically buy Jeep. And Jeep has been that property that has been glued to, it's like the ugly redheaded stepchild, and it's been glued to a bunch of different companies. And the only interest anyone ever has in Chrysler is because of Jeep. So, and when PSA came along and did the merger of equals, because that's always worked up for Chrysler, right? With FCA, I think it's something like 70%. It's over 50, I know that. Something like 70% of FCA's profits. The whole reason to buy a car company, the whole reason to buy any business really is like its profitability or potential for profitability. And it was all because of two brands, Jeep and Ram. Now, I'm going to do an entire episode on Stellantis, which is the new company that is born out of this merger of equals. In that episode, I'll just talk about all the right moves that they should make. And the CEO of Stellantis, Carlos Tavares, can use whatever he wants. And if they want, they can call me up and I'll head out to Michigan and I'll consult for them for nominal fees and a wide body Hellcat red eye. Black, silver racing stripes with the red interior. We'll come to some terms. But poor Jeep, the Chief Hoskins of the Cherokee Nation is saying, hey, guys, not cool that you're using our name on models. Now, I'm one of these people who's like, hey, political correctness is silly. These people shouldn't be offended, all that other stuff. But again, I'm a business guy, and I understand that people want to pursue this thing called profits. And if something, and I'm the kind of person, I've really strong political beliefs and religious beliefs and all this other stuff, but if something gets in the way of making money, I'm like, we got to solve that problem. And I think there's a total, if you take the total number of people that will not buy a Jeep because they have a model called Cherokee, I think that's 4 people. And then you take the people who are going to be pissed if you change the model name, and that's like what? 8 people. So now you got 12 people who aren't buying Jeeps strictly because they did or didn't do the correct thing. And if I'm Jeep, if I'm Stellantis, I'm looking at this and going, okay, the Grand Cherokee, as we understand it, as the marketplace knows it, is basically an invention of the 90s. It's existed for 20, 30 years. There's a lot of brand equity there, but you look at the future and go, well, does it really ultimately you could transition the entire Jeep lineup to some alphanumeric gobbledygook that doesn't make any sense to anybody. Just like so many brands have done, and I don't think Jeep should do this, and I don't want them to do this, but they could, and people would still come in and buy them because people are lemmings, and they want SUVs, and they want to crawl down at the mall. No one's actually going to a mall. That's just a saying. But, Jeep's brand is SUVs, and we're in the midst of an SUV craze. Makes sense to me, or it should make sense to Stellantis to change the name. And here's also another reason why the Grand Cherokee and Cherokee lineup needs a little refresh in terms of nomenclature and branding. It makes no sense to me that you can spend, it looks like the new Grand Cherokee L, and it looks like you're going to be able to spend, mid-60s, okay, or high 60,000s, and you can go buy a regular Cherokee, just the dumb 4-cylinder front-wheel drive one, and it's like going to be $22,000. So that to me is already a problem where this is like kind of in the vein of like what Hyundai's problem is with Genesis, which is you got customers coming in to buy this extremely expensive Genesis G90, and here's some guy buying a used Hyundai Elantra so his daughter can run DoorDash. But so there's a level of complication to these higher end models that Jeep hopes to come out with, and they're selling them next to. And in this particular situation, a guy can walk into a bar and plop his keys down and say, "I drive a Jeep Cherokee," and have spent $12,000 having purchased it from Hertz out of Hertz's bankruptcy, and the guy next to him can have a $70,000 Grand Cherokee L. So I think it makes sense because they're upsizing the Grand Cherokee to kind of meet with market demand, because the existing Grand Cherokee ain't so grand. It's kind of just a Cherokee. I think if I'm Stellantis, I bring out, assuming this will work, assuming you're interested, I'm saying you bring out the Cherokee Nation. I'm saying you make a donation to the America's First Nations people, or whatever they like to be called now. And I think you say, hey, the U.S. is going to have the Commander and Grand Commander, and that it's still a GC, so you keep the initials. And I think that, and I'll talk more about my, thoughts on Stellantis in general in the upcoming episode that is dedicated solely to Stellantis. But I think there's a lot of room to reform and manipulate and fix their branding and model selection and kind of chiropractic things. But I do think that when it comes down to Cherokee, I think your goal is to sell vehicles and make money. Just change the name. And I think by bringing back Commander, and in China already, the existing Cherokee exists on a much larger, the Cherokee that we have in the U.S. has an extended model, and so they have the Commander in China. And China's, Jeep's biggest growth market. Jeep is probably the only international brand in the Stellantis portfolio. But let me digress from that, and I want to talk about our good friends over at Ford. Ford has really bungled the launch of the Bronco Sport. And listen, a lot of people are going to say it's a sign of the times. Look at the era in which they launched this thing in the Dos Equis era. Can you blame them? It was a rough time to put out anything, let alone a car. Microchip shortage and so on. I thanks Bill Gates. But here's the thing. Ford also bungled the launch of their new Explorer. Now, this was the mall crawler to end all mall crawlers. This was the soccer mom vehicle of choice. It's also the choice of the 5.0, the Fuzz, cops. And so right now, the Bronco Sport is getting recalled again over some suspension parts. Now, I understand it's just a bummer for Ford, and I really just brought this up because I wanted to talk about why do they call this thing a Bronco Sport. I actually feel like this thing is going to outpace this thing is going to just eviscerate when they kind of get all the kinks out and when it's ready. When there's a little more settled and they kind of get all the junk out of it. And I think that it's just the styling of it. I think it's going to outsell. It's going to eviscerate the Escape in terms of sales. Now, to me, I understand wanting to utilize the Bronco brand, but to the people who the Bronco brand matters to, the Bronco Sport isn't a Bronco. It's a Bronco 2, which ain't a Bronco. So, in that context, I would have just I would have come up with a different name, the Escape Off-Road or something, I don't know. But I would have totally just replaced the Escape with this. I would have just called this the Escape and not bothered with the existing Ford Kuga Escape, which is it's just hideous. It's so boring, and then when it's done being boring, it's ugly. And it feels so, it lacks that rugged feeling that you're going to get from the Bronco Sport. And they could have just, and I say the same thing about Mustang Mach-E. It could have just been a Taurus, but I get it. That's a global audience. That vehicle has a global audience, the Mustang Mach-E. And I understand the enthusiast perspective because that is my perspective. I'm an enthusiast. I'm grossed out. It makes me sick to my stomach. It makes me want to barf that they're taking this wonderful vehicle that has touched so many people's lives. They're taking this iconic brand and they're turning it into a tall wagon. But they are selling to the Tesla customer. And that is what Ford's goal was with the Mustang Mach-E. And for a lot of reasons, I understand the business decision. Lotus has now canceled the Esprit. I don't know if you knew this, but apparently they're still pushing forward until very recently with the Esprit project started by Danny Bahar, the now disgraced former CEO of Lotus. So Danny Bahar, for those of you who are uninitiated, was the briefly the CEO of Lotus, and he had this bombastic plan that they were going to launch 5 new vehicles, one of them being the Esprit. After he got canned, the Lotus said, hey, we're scrapping 4 of these models that he says we wanted to come out with, and we're going to just come out with the Esprit. And he included an SUV and a sedan. And this was like 6 or 7 years ago. They came out with a press release saying, oopsie daisy, we're not coming out with the Esprit anymore much to the surprise of anyone who was paying attention, going, you guys were still doing the Esprit? So Lotus is an interesting brand. They're a performance brand. They're focused on light, small, fun, basically track cars. And, they make, basically just two models. One with a 4-cylinder Toyota engine, another with a V6 Toyota engine, tuned by Lotus, makes a lot of power. And I think they're an interesting brand. And why I think they're interesting is I think a upstart electric brand could come in, swoop in, and acquire them from Proton. I think they're still owned by the Malaysian concern Proton. You don't know what Proton is. No one else does either. I don't have a clue what Proton is. I think it's a Malaysian car company that owns Lotus. I think there's a lot of companies that could have acquired Lotus and could still acquire Lotus. That makes a lot of sense. I think that whoever owns Aston Martin, I think Lotus is actually complementary to them. I think that somebody could acquire Lotus right now and make like sporty electric cars. And hey, there's a guy who already did that and built a multi-billion-dollar business on the back of a Lotus model, and that is Elon Musk. As we all know, the original Tesla Roadster was a Lotus stuffed with a bunch of laptop and cell phone batteries, wacky concept. But I do think that Lotus deserves a better home, and I don't think that their kind of existing model is long for this world, only because I don't know how much longer Toyota will continue manufacturing at least that 6-cylinder, and that's going to be a problem for them because they don't. And listen, I'm going to be honest with you, I don't understand how their deal works with Toyota, because I know that Jonathan Ward from Icon 4x4 or Total Land Cruiser, who, he does these amazing $250,000 Land Cruisers, but they have GM E-Rod engines in them, and he's like, well, I went to Toyota to get Toyota when they started producing the 5.7 V8, and they said, listen, our manufacturing line just doesn't work like that. We're not General Motors. We're not going to be able to produce an engine for you, like just a raw engine. And so I wonder how their deal. It's probably because their numbers are more. They're a factory, right? He's one guy in California. Well, he's not one guy. He's a company. But I'm just saying, like, he doesn't have the manufacturing numbers that Lotus does. But still, it's such low volume that I would tend to think that, whatever. But I think that Lotus makes a lot of sense. That Proton's probably open to selling Lotus. And I think that one of these Chinese concerns that are building electric-only cars, NIO, any of these other people that are going public, I think if they just scooped up Lotus, and let me tell you why scooping up Lotus makes a lot of sense, is that, hey, this is a company that has global distribution. They have dealerships in places. Now, sure, these are dealerships that are low volume sellers, and they're usually attached to a Lambo dealership or something else, and it's not like a huge operation to sell 2 Lotus models. But I do think there's a lot of companies that could or should acquire Lotus, and that I think we're going to continue to see in the future tons and tons of consolidation among the established incumbent automakers as these upstart electric car companies start actually delivering models, which who knows when that ever is going to happen. But I have a lot of questions about, do these upstart car companies, electric car companies, who act like tech companies, do they even understand what it's going to take to launch cars and service them and warranties and all this other jazz? But anyways, folks, that was your first episode, the pilot episode of Carspiracy. If you're actually seeing this, who knows? I might not put it out. I once recorded 30 episodes of a podcast that never launched. Anyways, I'll be back with more stories. I want to talk more about more car news. And until then, don't drive safe, because that's for losers.